Hi everybody, thanks for being here tonight. My name is Liz Krueger. I'm a state senator, and this is, thank you. And you're supposed to be here at a Tenants Right and Advocacy in a critical year. So if you thought you were coming to the Graduate Center for a different topic, stay anyway, because there's no one who lives in New York City that housing isn't a critical issue. Even if you don't think it's a crisis for you, it is for others you know, it is for the generation above you, it is for the generation below you. And so I couldn't be happier that we're all here together tonight. Greg, do you need to tell me anything yet? Good. So I'm going to go through a couple of sort of the basics so that we know what's going on. We're going to be having a discussion with two leading tenant advocates about the upcoming fight to renew and strengthen the rent laws that protect almost 1 million rent-stabilized and controlled tenants. We're going to have questions and answers from the audience up here to the stage. So everybody in the materials you got up front should have received an index on the index card, and then at different times, hold them up, and some staff person will kindly come and get it from you. Just because I'm going to be the one trying to read the index cards, my handwriting, some of your handwriting is the best. The clearer the writing is, the better I will be in representing the question. Right after the Q&A section, we're actually breaking out into 4 workshops that will take place simultaneously in rooms around this out back. So you received with a workshop guide, look like this. You've got 2 folded pieces of paper. The workshop guide lays out what the topics of the 4 workshops are. They're all led by tremendous experts. You might be interested in more than one. I'm not telling you you can't stroll from one to the other, but if you do, please quietly stroll from one to the other. And because one of the workshops will be right here in the auditorium following the end of the Q&A section. For those of you staying at the workshop in this room, which one's in this room? Do you know? Sorry? So if you're staying in this workshop for repairs issues, then you can come up closer to the front. But if you're going to one of the 3 other workshops where you want to carry on conversations, or you just want to leave, let's quickly and quietly do it so that the workshop can roll ahead as quickly as possible. I want to, of course, thank everyone who's participating tonight, and people's names and bios on the materials you have. I want to thank the CUNY Graduate Center, who thankfully has fabulous auditorium space just like this, and very kindly allow me as a state legislator to use it for important community events such as this. I want to thank my staff who put an enormous amount of work and effort into this, and will be roaming around if anybody has any problems or issues. Why is this so important now? A lot of you are going to go, Liz, trust me, we've known this for a long time. But just to highlight, in case, I don't know, you were away and not reading the newspaper, the Democrats took over the state Senate. Why does that matter if you care about housing and tenants' rights? Because Republican control of the state Senate for most of everyone's adult life in this room has meant we don't make any progress. We just hold on to what we have and hope they don't take more of it away. And that's been the story year after year with the rent regulation fights. And you hold your breath till the last, perhaps, day of session, right as the law is sunsetting, hoping you get it back without too much damage done. Every single Democrat who ran for the state Senate in New York City this year ran with commitments to because it's turned out we've waited so long and screwed up housing for so long, the whole state is having problems with affordability and tenant protections. So it's not just New York City anymore, it's the entire state. And so we have a new fabulous group of legislators, some of whom are literally brand new, but they are all hungry to accomplish. We want to prove to you this has all been worth it. You are helping us turn over the state Senate, get rid of bad Republicans and bad Democrats, so that we can move important legislation. This is the year, next year, 2019. And you know what there is about elections? They come pretty often. So we either have to deliver the right goods for you, or maybe you don't invite us to continue to be your electeds in 2020. Every 2 years we run for re-election. So it is crucial that we make good on our commitments to people from our campaigns. And again, 39 Senate Democrats, 40 if you count Simcoe, which is a little tricky for some people, but mostly 40, and only 24 or 23 Republicans. That's a radical change of majority-minority shift. So it's not just we took the majority with 32 when you need 32 to pass a bill, and if somebody gets a cold, you don't get anything done. We have a healthy majority to move. We should see an end of Assembly Senate gridlock on important housing bills. So the Assembly has been passing very progressive, excellent rent regulation, tenant protection bills year after year after the year. And everyone in this room knows they didn't pass the Senate. So now we need to pass them in both houses. And there's no reason for us not to be able to work closely together to make sure that we look at every bill, we say we could do better in 2018. We always passed this bill, but we were never sure what it really meant. So we're sitting down with advocates and we're figuring out how to get it right. But we have an opportunity to begin to undo weakening of rent laws done over decades by the Senate Republicans and pro-landlord governors as well. We have an opportunity to actually see real wins in increasing the number of units brought back into rent regulation. And to come up with a statewide system to address the issues outside New York City, which are not exactly the same as ours. Here, when you say multifamily dwelling, everybody knows we're talking apartment houses. There are parts of the state, they don't even know what multifamily dwelling means. So we need to make sure we come up with the right answers for outside of New York City also. But just starting off, and I'm sure you will hear it from my two experts here, we want to end the preferential rent loophole, which is both allowing exploitation and fraud by landlords and setting people into little panic that at any given moment their landlord could skyrocket their actual rent costs even when they have a rent-regulated lease. We want to end vacancy decontrol. We want to reform the system of automatic vacancy increases. Just because an apartment turns over to a new tenant, and it might not even be painted in between, why would you allow a 20% increase? Or over a 20% increase if the people leaving were there quite a few years before they left? There's no excuse. And we need to try to change and reform the process by which we give MCIs and IAs. What I'm going to ask you to do before I sit down is remember our fight and our win on these bills in Albany is the exact same process as the fight and wins of people in the state of New York organizing to vote new people into office. You need to get 5 more people who will stand with you to make demands on legislators, not just who represent you, but from other parts of the state. You need to make sure every single senator is educated about what these issues really mean housing systems. So in the workshops, if you look at them and aim for a workshop that seems to apply mostly to the issues you're really worried about personally, that would be a much better place where you would have an opportunity to learn about some of the realities and solutions you might have available to you. But when you break down those questions, if you go into detail about your case, your building, your landlord, I'm probably not going to actually even read that one because we'll have a limited amount of time and we're going to try to stay focused on the big picture. So with that, Delsenia, you can either sit there or stand up, whichever you prefer.
If you're going to sit down, I'll stay seated.
Okay, we'll sit down.
Good evening, everybody. I can't hear you. All righty then. First, I want to say thank you again to Senator Liz Krueger. Senator Liz Krueger is the best, longer-serving senator in New York State. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. She has always been on the side of what is right for tenants and for New Yorkers, period. And for the folks who live in her district, you are lucky and blessed. And I mean that. So, who's in the room, by the way? Is everybody here a rent-regulated tenant? All righty. The only person who can turn out a better room for a town hall meeting than me is Liz Krueger. So, you know, 4 years ago, well, almost 4 years ago, when the rent laws were going to be up for renewal in 2015, in 2014, we kept saying 2015 is the year of the tenant. Well, that was not true. 2019 is the year of the tenant, and we're going to get some stuff done. However, I am an optimistic person, but just because we have flipped the Senate does not mean that we get to rest or sit back. We are still in a fight, and we have to make sure that things happen for tenants finally after all this time. So I'm here this evening to represent the Upstate Downstate Housing Alliance, and the campaign to strengthen the rent laws is Housing Justice for All. And the reason why we named the group, well, first of all, let me tell you who's part of the group. There are a laundry list of organizations that are part of this alliance, from organizations upstate like Take Back the Land Rochester, to organizations that downstate like Maple Road, New York, Tenants and Neighbors, Met Council on Housing, New York Communities for Change, Democratic Socialists of America, and on and on and on. And the reason why we're so excited and a little bit confident, but not, as I said, nothing's a slam dunk, is because we have grown our alliance to across the state. And the reason why we did that was tactical, because in previous rent law fights, rent laws have always been sort of a downstate issue. And so legislators from upstate, they could very easily ignore our issues because there was nobody in their backyards clamoring for anything having to do with housing. So what we did was we expanded the platform. The overarching theme is universal rent control. And so part of universal rent control is, one, fixing the rent laws that Senator Krueger was just talking about. Another is just cause eviction. Another is fixing the homelessness crisis. And so as we've expanded our platform and as we've expanded the people who are part of the coalition, that's how we've expanded our power. And so I'm not going to go through the platform, which I was going to do because Liz has already done that. But what I will say is that we are in a crisis situation. So, and I know we say that every time, but it's really that time. If we do not fix renters' rights and rent regulation in this upcoming year, a lot of the people in this room 10 years from now, including me, will not be in this city, and it will look entirely different. This is a serious crisis situation. I see some of my people from the rent control community here. Fixing rent control is a part of our platform. It's always been a part of our platform, and I always insist that it's a part of our platform because folks don't know what is happening with rent control tenants. People think rent stabilization and rent control is the same thing. It is not. You can be living in a building and the rent control tenants, I'm sure one of you are going to say something about this tonight, and if the person upstairs from you is a rent stabilized tenant and you're a rent control tenant and you both have been living in the building the same amount of time, the rent stabilized tenant may be paying $1,300 a month and your rent will be maybe $2,600 a month. And these are senior citizens living on fixed incomes, and it's a shame. Even for the people who have screen, because when the ceiling for screen was raised to $50,000 a year, their rent froze, but it didn't help people who are already paying 70% of their income in rent because they still have no quality of life, and it needs to be rolled back. That's going to be on the platform next year, Liz. So I just wanted to give an overview of what we're doing. We have been working with the members of our alliance to put together this coalition. We've been having member assemblies across in different parts of the state, including Albany and Rochester. 2 weeks ago, we did a huge march down in Wall Street, and we had about 400 people out in the snow. You remember that night when there was that big storm? I was out there with my old self, marching and chanting, along with about 400 people who are rent-regulated tenants and homeless people. So I just wanted to give you an overview of what we're doing, because I know the main thing here is to get questions and answers from the audience. I'm going to turn it over to Michael. For those of you who don't know Michael McKee, he is like the historian of the tenant movement in New York City, and he knows everything. And so when I'm on a panel with Michael, I get tongue-tied because I'm saying things to myself, what am I going to say that Michael is not going to already say better? But I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
And I think it's a good idea to put Michael in the Smithsonian eventually.
I think we should do that.
If you could just download my brain.
So but the last thing I'm going to say is that everyone who is a rent-regulated tenant should be a part of this campaign. Join a community-based organization. Join Tenants and Neighbors. I have some brochures outside, and I also have some flyers. On Monday, December 10th, this Monday coming up, at 11 a.m., Senator Krueger and her colleagues from the Assembly and the Senate will be holding a press conference to talk about what our demands are for renters' rights coming up in 2019. And we're going to have a bunch of tenants out there. And all of you, if you are available at 11 o'clock, come to the steps of City Hall on Monday to join us so we can have a show of power and strength to the governor.
Well, I hate it when I get that kind of introduction, because then no matter what I say, it's going to be a disappointment.
No, it's not.
But anyway, Delsenia exaggerates somewhat. I want to ask a question. How many of you were active in the election this last fall? How many of you did things like door knocking or phone banking to help elect Democrats to the state Senate? Hey, that's not bad. That's a pretty good example. We had a wonderful year, starting on September 13th, when 6 members of the breakaway Democratic rogue Democrats, known as the IDC, otherwise known as the I Don't Care Coalition, went down in defeat, including their leader, Jeff Klein. And were replaced by new senators-to-be. They're not senators yet, they won't be until January 1st, who are younger, many of them female, people of color, all of whom ran on a platform of stronger rent protections, every single one of them. I mean, this was, when you talk to a couple of them, they say, this is the issue that decided me to run against Jesse Hamilton, against Jeff Klein, etc. It was rent regulation and what they see happening in their neighborhoods that motivated them. This is going to be an exciting year in Albany, because in addition to long-standing stalwarts like Liz Krueger and a few others, we're going to have an influx of new, younger, energetic, passionate members who are going to insist on doing something for tenants. So I'm really psyched. Then on November 6th, some of us were out in Brooklyn door knocking in the rain for Andrew Gennardis. People thought, there's no way Marty Goldman can go down. That's too conservative a district. Even in the last redistricting in 2012, they made it even more conservative, but they forgot that it was still a district where there were 3 Democrats for every 2 Republicans, so it all comes down to turnout. That's what we always say. It's all about turnout. And lo and behold, Andrew Gennardis beat Marty Goldman, who was one of 2 Republican senators in New York City remaining. And even though we only beat him by like 1,300 votes, we'll take it. And make sure that he establishes himself over the next 2 years to that he'll be able to be reelected. And he also ran on our platform. Very exciting that tenants all over the United States are organizing for rent control. Chicago, Seattle, Portland. There are tenants in Texas who are trying to start an organization to push for rent control protections. There's a reason for this. People are hurting. And that's the impetus for rent control. And it's very exciting to me seeing in New York State that we have a renewed activism in all parts of the state. The weekend after the election, I went to Rochester to do a workshop for tenants from Syracuse, Rochester, and Akron, which is in Erie County near Buffalo, who are organizing for rent control. And the day before, we went to Albany, some of us, and met with Senator Neil Breslin, who's now the senior Democratic upstate senator, and who's always been right there for us, has always voted the right way, even though his district has no rent regulation. He's always supported our bills. And we asked him if he would carry a bill to amend the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, ETPA, which is the basic state rent law, which is now restricted to New York City and the 3 suburban counties, Nassau, Westchester, and Rockland. If he would have carried that bill to amend the ETPA to cover all 62 counties in the state, and he said yes. Not only that, TenantsPAC sent a questionnaire to a number of upstate Democrats who were running for state senate seats, and all of the ones who won have committed to, in writing on this questionnaire, to supporting this bill to extend rent control statewide. So that's a very exciting development. Now, none of this is going to just happen. And as wonderful as it is for us to have both houses controlled by the Democrats, and don't get me wrong, it's not that the Democrats are so great. In fact, I happen to think the Democratic Party as an institution is pretty much hopeless. But if you stop and think about it, if you stop and think about it, the reason we haven't been able to get anything done in Albany is because the state Senate Republicans, even when they were down to a 1-vote majority, wouldn't let any of our bills out of committee onto the floor, because the state Senate Republicans are essentially owned by the New York City real estate lobby, lock, stock, and barrel. So we have a chance now, but we're going to have to work to make it happen. I want to talk a little bit about Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who is the new majority leader. We helped elect her in 2006 when she beat Nick Spano, another Republican everyone said could never be beat. And I think it was probably the proudest day in TenantsPAC history. We had about 75 volunteers up in Yonkers and Greenberg and the river towns working for her. We had another 40 other volunteers down in our office in Lower Manhattan doing phone calls for her. And she is the lead sponsor of our most important bill, which is the bill to repeal vacancy decontrol. I wish I could say that I'm a political genius and that I knew when I went to see her in 2007, when we asked her to carry this bill, that she would be the majority leader someday. I wasn't even thinking about that. We were thinking we wanted to make it clear that rent regulation is not just a New York City only issue. And Andrea Stewart-Cousins has the greatest number of rent-regulated apartments of any legislator outside the city, and her Senate district has the most of any in Westchester. She has always been strongly supportive of tenants. When Joe Bruno, you remember him? Some of you remember him. When Joe Bruno said he would not renew the rent laws in 1997, Andrea was a Westchester County legislator. She organized 5 town halls in different parts of her district in Yonkers, different neighborhoods, where we would recruit tenants, alert them to the danger, get them to write letters and postcards right there on the spot to Nick Spano. She helped us pay for buses for Tenant Lobby Day. She helped us fill buses for Tenant Lobby Day. And she has always been right there for us. Now, remember that her bill not only repeals vacancy decontrol going forward, it re-regulates most of the apartments that we have lost in the last 25 years since vacancy decontrol was enacted. It's sponsored in the Assembly by Linda Rosenthal and a bunch of others, and Senator Krueger is. We can't take anything for granted. We're going to have to work to make this happen. We have powerful enemies. Their power comes from their money, and we should never forget their money comes from the rent that we pay them. This is why campaign finance reform is just as important to us as it is to any other constituency. Of course, the state can't do anything about Citizens United. That's a federal issue, but the state can do a lot of things to take big money out of politics. And if we can reduce the ability of the real estate lobby to pump money into our elections, that will diminish their power. So these are very important bills, just as important to us as to any other progressive constituency. Let me just say one.
I'm sorry, and the Senate Democrats, in addition to the housing bills, have a very high priority on making sure we close the LLC loophole. Get as far as we possibly can on a low donor public financing system in campaigns, because as Michael said, that matters so much for these bills, and it matters for so many other issues of democracy as well. And expanding voter rights, because what we have learned is when more people vote, we end up getting better elected officials.
That's true. That's true.
I just wanted to mention one other thing that I didn't mention when I was doing the opening, and that is to say a little something more about universal rent control and what that means. Universal rent control means exactly that, universal rent control. And what that does, it binds together folks who are rent regulated with folks who are not rent regulated, with folks who have market rate rent. So you can go back home and tell your neighbors in your building that if they want to join this campaign, they can do so, because market rate tenants, we believe, need protection also. This platform would, if we can get the whole thing through, Senator Krueger, would protect all tenants in all situations, with the exception of folks who lived in owner-occupied buildings with 3 apartments or less.
Right.
That's a good thing.
Let me just say a little bit about the governor. I don't think people are cynical about elected officials, and there's good reason for people to be cynical about elected officials. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not good reason, but I'm not worried so much about whether our friends in the Assembly or our friends in the Senate are going to sell us out. I think our problem may come from the second floor of the Capitol, which is where the governor is located.
That's right.
Now, Andrew Cuomo is going to say all the right things in public. The question is, what will he do behind closed doors? As far as I'm concerned, given his record on our issues, he is guilty until proven innocent. If I'm wrong about Andrew, I'll be very happy. But I think I'm not wrong. I'm a little bit suspicious about what he might actually try to do in terms of watering down our platform. For example, putting pressure on Carl Hastie, the Speaker of the Assembly, not to repeal vacancy decontrol, but to raise the threshold again and call it a great tenant victory, which is what he did twice. So we have to be very vigilant. But bottom line, folks, is that you need to be part of this army.
That's right.
We have to think of this as a war.
That's right.
And we have to think of ourselves as soldiers. We have to be active is all going to be over in 7 months. You can go back to whatever you were doing before in July, because the legislative session goes from January to June. The rent laws come up for renewal and have to be renewed before June 15th. Doesn't mean the legislature has to wait until the last minute, but that's the timetable. The narrative is changing. The narrative about rent control is changing. Economists are starting to take another look at rent control as a policy, and many economists are now starting to talk about rent control as a positive. The New York Times, which for years has editorialized against any form of rent control, is now on record is calling, they've actually basically wrote an editorial endorsing our entire platform.
That's right.
And they're going to do more editorials in the coming months. I mean, this is a big sea change. So get on board and help us win. Because if we think about this as a war, and we think of ourselves as members of an army, we can win, and we can win big.
And things, and I just wanted to also mention things like the New York Times article, series of articles happening. Things like that don't just happen. This is the work this is from work we do that I've been doing behind the scenes for a very long time. Those articles came out of a conversation, a meeting that the New York Times editorial board had with members of our alliance. So we do all sorts of work.
So we're now going to try to get to some of the questions. There are many, and they are excellent. And a few of them, even the ones I just got handed, relate more specifically to when your landlord's doing certain things and you can't get DHCR or HPD to deal with complaints. I'd say those are better directed at a couple of the workshops. So I'm just telling people that probably isn't going to be a question. So rent control. A bunch of people emphasize that when we talk about rent regulation and what we're trying to do, that we need to address the concerns about rent control as well. And yes, the way this question is structured, yes, there's still a different program, rent control, from rent regulating. Rent stabilization. They're all under rent, sorry, thank you. They're all under rent regulation, but stabilizes the vast majority of apartments, and a shrinking number are rent controlled, and the population tends to be older and lower income, because basically there's been no new rent control forever at this point, and there's almost impossible succession rates. So what are we going to do about rent control?
And they pay much more, their raises are much more.
Thank you.
So,
Yes, they
yeah.
get over 7% increase every
Right.
year, plus, while rent guidelines board sets a number. Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
So, yeah, I addressed the plight of rent control tenants a little earlier and talked about the discrepancy between how much they pay and how much rent stabilized people pay because they have a different formula for calculating how much of the rent increases. It's called an MVR increase. I know one of the things that last year, there was a rent freeze campaign by rent control tenants, and I don't know how many people know about that, except for the folks who were involved. And we had we had a couple town hall meetings up on the Upper West Side. Lots of folks showed up. We mapped out a campaign, and at the culmination of the campaign for rent freeze, we had a civil disobedience, and a bunch of septuagenarians and octogenarians got arrested in front of Governor Cuomo's office. There she is. She's one of the arrestees. We shared a cell. We shared a cell. It was my first time going to jail. And what happened because the rent control increases are calculated every 2 years, and it's based on something called maximum base rent, and it has to do with, the landlord's cost, and it's a whole formula. But in 2014, I guess it was, or 15, when the increase was calculated, it was calculated at 9.6%. And the 9.6% is stretched over 2 years. It was originally going to be higher than that, but we put up a ruckus and it went down just a few points. And so when we did the campaign for rent freeze last year, the year before, was that last year? Yes, for last year. The new increase that was given was 7.4%. So what that means, even though that's high, if you got a 7.4% increase for 2018, that means in 2019, you will not get a rent increase. So technically, it's a rent freeze, although the increase was a lot. So what I'm saying is that when putting yourself on the line and going out and doing activism, it does help, because I truly believe it would have been higher than that if these tenants here, stand-up rent control tenants that are part of the rent control leadership in New York City. These are the folks who have been working for years and years and years to get something done about rent control. That is why I will never abandon rent control tenants, and as long as I have a breath in me and I'm doing this work, fixing rent control is at the top of my list of things that need to happen. In 1984, there were over 450,000 rent control tenants and units in this city. We're down to about 26,000. And the folks who are living in the remaining units are paying, for the most part, extraordinary rents. And these are people retired. It's a shame. It is horrific. And yes, we are working on that, and hold me to it.
And there's one bill at least.
And your
that's been
legislators.
sponsored by Brian Benjamin in the Senate.
That's right. And then the real estate.
Assembly that would basically make the formula for rent control departments, whatever the RGB.
Yeah, it would be the average of 5 years of what the rent increases are for
I don't know whether
tenants.
Brian or Linda might be amending their bill for reintroduction. Probably people who are part of the rent control advocacy community may know, but keep pushing, because I think this is absolutely the year to fix this problem.
Absolutely.
So thank you for bringing that up. So one question I can just answer myself is, how will new rent regulations impact renters in newly built buildings under rent regulation the same way it impacts everyone else? So there's no difference in how rent regulation impacts you, whether you're living in an older building or a new building. Although it does raise an interesting thing, because we're always trying to deal with facts versus myths. So the myth, my favorite myth is, I hate being an owner under rent regulation. It's a terrible system for me. When did you buy your building? Before 1974? No. Well, then you knew you were buying a rent-regulated building, and you did the math and realized you were going to make money on it. And if you're in a building that's been built, like since 1974, that's in rent regulation, you volunteered to go into rent regulation because all the tax credits would translate into it being a better economic decision for you to do rent regulation. No one has been forced to buy a rent-regulated building with a gun. There's no system like that. And no buildings have been built since 1974 that have rent regulation that didn't knowingly, with lawyers involved, choose to participate in rent regulation. So don't fall for that stuff, okay? All right.
Can I add just one little thing, Liz? So to your question, what can you do about buildings being built? So one of the things that we know is that when new buildings go up, and there's a lot of, in the rezoned areas, there's a lot of 80-20 and that kind of thing. So this is not a state issue, this is more of a city issue. And what happens is that the 20% or even 30% of the so-called affordable units are priced so high that they are, for the most part, above what is the median income for a particular neighborhood where those buildings are being built. So the key to, that's a city issue. That happens, they negotiate with the city. So what needs to be done about that is the community needs to come together when one of these buildings are going up with their community boards, so that you have a place at the table when the landlord is negotiating the term sheet for that particular property with the city. That's the only way to fix the fact that most of those apartments are going to be too expensive for the people in the community, is to get involved and change the term sheets.
Thank you. So I think this is what you both talked about a lot, which is what do constituents do to strengthen their tenant rights and to demand the Democratic Senate pass the right bills. Who do we specifically contact? So it seems to me the answer is you want to sign up with both of these people's organizations so that you can be kept alert and aware of when they're asking people to contact their legislators, other legislators, perhaps get on the bus, come to Albany, participate in protests and press events. So did we give these people any materials about how they stay in contact with you?
Well, I put flyers for the press conference that's happening on Monday, and there's a contact person at Tenants and Neighbors, our operations manager. They can call up and leave a message and get more information.
And also, this little pitch to everybody under 40 in the room, you know more about social media and stuff like this. You know more about social media than I will ever know, and so you know that you have an ability to reach an enormous number of people through your own systems and networks. So please use those skills that apparently genetically are programmed into those of you under 40 to help us get out the word. And if you're over 40 and can do all this and I've offended you, I didn't mean to. Mostly I'm talking about myself. So we want to get this information out there so that then we get a larger and larger army of people contacting all the right elected officials when it matters. Okay? It's interesting. So if we would fix the preferential rent loophole for rent-stabilized apartments, wouldn't this create a tremendous risk that owners will just stop being willing to rent at preferential rents in the future?
I don't think so, because the reason owners give landlords, give tenants a preferential rent is any rent that's lower than the legal rent. So if the legal rent's $1,800 and they rent it for $1,100 or $1,200, that's a preferential rent. And the reason landlords do this generally is if the local market conditions don't support a rent that's equivalent to the legal rent. So if they want to rent their apartments, they're going to have to give people a discount. And we should also remember that a lot of these so-called legal rents are fraudulent. They have been, the amendments that have been inserted into the rent laws in the last 25 years are structured in such a way to encourage landlord fraud. So a lot of the legal registered rents are actually illegal rents, but now that they've been registered, and unless the tenant challenges them within 4 years, they become the legal rent. That's it's a terrible fix that's needed in the system, and we cannot undo all of the damage that's been done in the last 25 years. But I don't think it's going to cause landlords not to give preferential rents. They will have to if they want to rent their apartments in some neighborhoods.
Why are landlords allowed to rent apartments as hotel rooms for under 30 days? They're not. They do it, but it's illegal. So if you know that there are apartments in your building that are being rented out as illegal units, usually on the site called Airbnb, but there are other ones, then you can report that to the Office of Special Enforcement. You can call 311. The Office of Special Enforcement at the New York City website has its own form you can fill out to report, have your neighbors fill out and report as well. Sometimes this all gets rolled together. Well, okay, I'm going away for a week and I'm renting it out to a friend. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about apartments being rented out day in, day out on an ongoing basis, being removed from the residential housing of the city of New York. We all know how desperate we are for affordable housing. Every time a unit comes off, that's one less unit for people who live here, and it goes into this Airbnb type system where you've got landlords participating, you've got brokers participating, you've got people who think they're just doing clever speculation, and they go out and they figure out how to rent 20 apartments, perhaps in 20 different buildings, and then rent them out. That is all illegal activity, and we need to work to stop it. Not me, the city council has just passed a law that was scheduled to go into effect in the beginning of 19. Airbnb has filed a lawsuit, and it will take some time. But basically, the new city law will be, if Airbnb is putting up an apartment in New York City on its system, it has to let government know the address and who's the host, who activities happening, and then they will have a fine system with a growing fine for the number of units and the number of days they are up. This is a problem impacting pretty much every community in the city of New York at this point. And it's not just another unit of affordable housing. It's also, I look around this room, and there are a lot of, I don't mean to stereotype, but there are a lot of women who might be living alone in a building that has no staff. I live in a building with no staff. What do I do like all smart New Yorkers? When I get the key in the front door, I look both ways to make sure there's nobody who's about to push it behind me, right? That's like a New Yorker's common sense approach. Well, so you think you're living in a residence where you know everyone. And suddenly there are people with luggage coming and going, all times of day and night. Sometimes tourists who rent Airbnbs like to party. I get it, they're tourists, they come to New York to party. So they're partying in the apartment next to yours at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Not so much fun, okay? So there are many health and safety reasons. This is not a good idea. And there's the fundamental, are we ensuring that we protect affordability of housing for the people who live here? That's what we need to be doing. So. Even though we didn't touch on this tonight, and I will leave
The rent stabilized development where I live, we have a pending lawsuit where our landlord was deregulating apartments while there was still J51 in effect. And a lot of times these things are happening and tenants don't really know. Tenants have to be proactive, and it's incumbent, unfortunately, it's incumbent upon the tenants to, do the research and find out what's happening in the building, what the history of the building is, getting your rent history. Anyone who moves into, we haven't said this already, anyone who moves into a rent-stabilized apartment, especially with the preferential rent, because that's probably what you're going to have if you move into a rent-stabilized apartment these days, get your rent history. Because before, because there was so much fraud happening with the rent increases that, and after 4 years, there's nothing you can really, there's not a whole lot you can do about it, except file, but you can file a lawsuit.
And I think the important lesson, if you can landlord stabilization credits, you can hate them, but if you're living in a unit where the building's getting them, you are probably eligible to be under rent regulation. You might never have been told, or they may have pulled out, but you may have legal protections and rights to get back into rent regulation. So it is important to be able to check whether the building you live in is actually getting these tax credits. All right, I have like 2 minutes left. So one of the questions was, do we have Facebook and Twitter sites? So my website's lizkrueger.com. And if you go on my site within the next day, Michael, I'm looking at you, we'll make sure we have all the website contact for both of these people and the other housing organizations. I suspect we do, but we'll put it all in one place, okay? So that you can find who are the groups like this and others that are doing presentations in the workshops tonight to find them and follow up, okay? So just lizkrueger.com as the first place to look, and we'll get you that kind of information.
And you can also go to, if you're on Twitter, we are at Tenant Neighbor, and I am at Delsenia TN. Follow me on Twitter.
All right, thank you. Many detailed questions, that is just too long to get into. A very pointed question about the continuing growth of homelessness in the city. Yes. Lots of answers, none adequate, but guess what? Every unit of affordable housing that we lose increases the chances we will see another homeless family in the city. So I've always interpreted my assignment to protect tenants in their homes is if they lose their unit and something happens to them and they move on somewhere else and the rent skyrockets in that unit, we just lost that unit for everyone, not just for them. And when you lose hundreds of thousands of those units for everyone, you start to understand the go, you end up doubled up and tripled up, and then welcome to the New York City shelter system. So it is directly correlated, even though it's a much bigger discussion than we're prepared to have tonight. I'm sorry, all the people whose cards I didn't get to. I want to thank my experts, remind everyone, figure out which workshop, go to it now. The staff can help point you to the right one. And if you're staying for repairs, come up front. And let's all be relatively quiet as we make our moves so we can get to the workshop. And thank you.